Welcome to the Relationship Revivalist podcast. This is the 11th episode here, and I'm with my wife and co-host, Jess.
Hey, John.
Hey, how are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. It's a new year, and we're still just cruising along here.
Oh, yes. Very excited.
And we just love what we're doing. So today, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, John, we're going to talk about how to have a relationship that exudes love, not fear.
That is an awesome topic. Now let's kind of feel this one out a little bit.
Give a little bit of a backstory.
Yeah. I mean, so how did we come up with this topic here?
Well, for me, one of the huge benefits of being married to you, John, is that you have created a real safe space for me to be able to flourish and to really be my true self, because I know that you're not going to be judgmental of me, of what I say, of what I do, and you trust me. And so because of all that, I'm able to be more of my true self and to really flourish. And I just love this life.
It sounds like a thing that many people would like to have in their relationships if they don't already have that.
I agree. And so we know that fear and love are opposites.
Exactly.
Right. And so if you have fear, if your relationship is based on fear, that doesn't feel good. That feels really yucky. But if your relationship is based on love, you're going somewhere with your spouse. It's really exciting. So we want to make sure and to help people to make sure that their relationship is based on love, not fear. So let's talk a little bit about the fear part first. Let's get the yucky out of the way.
Yeah, so like you were saying earlier, if you can either have fear or you can have love. And, I don't know if you equate this in your general thinking, but, when you have fear, that is equative to darkness. Mm-hmm. And you have love. I mean, love and light. We always hear that, don't we? Mm-hmm. So we have to have light. And when you have darkness, it's hard to maneuver around in your relationship because you don't know where you're going to be able to take a safe step next. Mm-hmm. And that would cause you to really be on edge. And when you're on edge, you tend to lash out at people, right? And
yeah, but because fear comes in a lot of different forms where people don't even realize they're afraid, but insecurity is fear. Yeah. And so if people are insecure within themselves, they are usually more likely to lash out when they didn't need to, when they could have just given a soft answer instead. And they are putting a wedge for deeper and deeper in between them and their partner.
So when people lash out, it would make sense to me that, they're fearful, they're insecure. And a lot of that has to do with trust. And the other thing that I'm thinking about is it would have to do with how they were raised by their parents. Mm-hmm. And it really does reflect a ton on your parents, your grandparents, and goes right up on the line. I don't know how many generations, but whatever it gets started, who's going to step up and say no and change what you have gone through?
And guess what? You're the one who gets to. Isn't that great?
That is awesome. This is the place. This is the time to change the things that you want to be changed.
Mm-hmm. It's so exciting, and what better time than in the new year? So, for example, for me, I didn't have love relationships before I met John. It's my first boyfriend, my first everything, which is really so special to me. But I was raised, I was a kid, I had parents, I have had lots of other types of relationships all growing up and in my adult life and everything. And like John was saying, a lot of times the way you're raised, when, even by very well-meaning parents, maybe there was an area that their parents didn't raise them the right way in or whatever. And for me, I was raised in a great Christian home. Very, very stable, very loyal people. My parents are awesome. But there are times where, for example, my dad couldn't handle stress very well at all. Mm-hmm. In life, stressful situations come up all the time, and more we know how to deal with it with peace and joy and love, the better, your relationship's going to be, the better your house is going to be, the better your family's going to feel. And so there were so many times where, I'd feel my stomach, clenching up because, something would happen and my dad was very angry. I mean, he was never abusive or anything like that, but just yelling to the air, basically, still, takes away peace, takes away joy. Mm-hmm. And he would, sometimes even just go walk off and still grumbling and complaining and talking loud and stuff.
But you want to please your parents.
Right. And thankfully, he wouldn't do that. He would walk away, but there was still that feeling that I took with me into adulthood, and I didn't realize that I did. Mm-hmm. And so my point is, when I met John, there were times where, we'd have a little stressful situation, and I was expecting him to react the same way, and he didn't.
The shoe didn't drop.
I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it never did. And even to this day, sometimes he amazes me by, because I've gotten more used to having a house of peace, right? And not having someone who blows up at anything. Like John is always even keel. He always remains calm and peaceful. He just fixes the situation if he can, or he finds out how to fix it if he doesn't know how to right away. And it is amazing. And because of that, I feel very safe. I know I can trust him. And he showed me that there's a different way to live, and it's so much better.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you talk a little bit, John. I feel like I've taken a lot of the conversation, but I hope that helps somebody.
It's just that your story is going to help somebody, because there's obviously somebody out there in podcast land,
right,
that is listening to this story and thinking, wow, this is exactly what I've been going through. And so how do we get to the point where we can heal that thought in our heads? Mm-hmm. We can heal the emotions. We can heal the spiritual part of it.
Right.
And we can heal the mental part of it. And that's the full, complete you. That's how we heal. And, you may not know if this is one of the first ones that you're listening to. I went through a time where I lost my second wife due to cancer. And, I had some grieving to do, and I had a lot of help in that. I was immediately, when it happened, I got the call saying that she'd passed away. I felt like I was literally ripped in half. And when your spirit you can feel your spirit, and it's not in your heart. If you're reading the Bible and it says you can do anything as long as you believe in your heart that you can do it, you will have it. So what they're talking about there is your heart is really in your stomach.
It's your spirit, man.
It's your spirit, man.
Stomach, yep.
And that is what the heart is, and that's where the living water flows. You've got the unlimited and powerful living water. So I literally was seeking out how to heal myself. And when you are in a situation where your relationship maybe have a little bit of fear involved, maybe it has a lot, who knows? I'm just putting that out there. If you have any kind of fear in your relationship, you have to seek God. You have to ask him to heal your fears and your emotions along with that. And that is what's going to help you get further down the road. And really, you look at where you're at now and you think, well, we're on a ship. It's called the relationship. It's called our marriage.
That's good.
And we're going down the river, and we don't really want to go down that river. We want to go up the river and adjacent down to a different river that's going to give us more fruitful relationship. It's going to give us more prosperity, more abundance. Just like Jesus said, we're going to have a more abundant time. He promised that, and that has to happen. It's a law. So when we have laws like that, we have to know that we have a way to get out of where we're at now and turn the ship around. And how does a ship steer itself? Well, today's ships have rudders. Mm-hmm. A lot of boats have rudders, and that's how they turn. Mm-hmm. And I liken those rudders to our words, the things that our tongues, because it's one of the most powerful things in us is our tongue, because we can speak life and we can speak death. we tell you and we suggest that you speak life.
And in fact, the Bible says to choose life. So
Exactly.
the answer's already there.
Yeah, and this is an open book quiz.
Exactly.
So when we want to change how we have a relationship, and it's been a fear thing, and you want to start exuding love in your relationship, I would say one of the first things that you have to do to get that ship to turn around is to start loving yourself. Start doing some study in the Bible and find out, what does God say about me? Who does he say that I am?
Exactly.
And if you start learning and you start repeating these things over and over again so that you can focus your mind on those words, when you are tuned into those words and you believe them, magic happens. And I wouldn't even say magic. I would just say extraordinary things happen in your life that you're like, wow, how in the world did that happen? And then you will start to think, well, I've been doing this and I've been doing it consistently on a daily basis for the last, 2-3 weeks. And these things start popping up. You're like, oh my gosh. And it gets you addicted to doing those things, keeping your mind on the right words that God says you are. Mm-hmm. That's how you start to bring your ship around so that you can go down the right river, the river of life. Mm-hmm. And what else would we want to do to help turn that ship around, Jess?
Well, when you were talking, John, it made me think, so we have to work on ourselves first. And of course, I know the answer is yes. Uh-huh. To be able to help our relationships. It's like we have to hold up our end of the deal, work on ourselves, to know our self-worth, what God says about us. And when because when people talk about, this is my better half. Well, that's not really how it's set up. We're not half people together making a whole. We have to be whole people. So if you don't feel like you're a whole person, you're not being your true self yet, we would encourage you to do what we're talking about. Find some Bible verses of things that God says about you. Great, because he only says awesome things about us. But when we have two whole people coming together, then that's a whole relationship. It's not two halves. It's two wholes coming together. Now, that might not sound like very good math, but that's how it is in relationships. Exactly. Like John was talking about. So you have to know your self-worth, and you have to love yourself to be able to love anyone else.
That's it. That's so true. Dead on right there. And when you know who you are, and you know who what your self-worth is, because you've really literally checked into what God says in his word, and you've gotten that down into your heart, this is when things really just explode in your favor, because when you've done the work, you deserve what comes from that work. And there's a universal law, and that is, if you do what you're focused on, whatever it is that you do, and you focus on it and you're consistent on it, you're going to eventually see the fruits from that work that you do. That applies to anything and everything. So know that whatever you do, including your relationship building, you can get there. Don't ever give up on your relationship. Don't ever give up on your spouse. Your spouse will come around, whether they're completely against what you're doing now or, whatever. They're going to come around, because it's a law that is in place. Now, the other thing we want to say is you want to ask some clarifying questions about what you're talking about. And maybe, Jess, you can give a little more insight to that.
Oh, sure. So I think I shared in another podcast where early on in our marriage, I would just assume that I understood something that John told me. And usually when I assumed something, it was something that, I thought that he was saying something against me or was not agreeing with me. And so when I would just assume and not ask extra questions to ask what he really meant by what he said, I might get into like a bad mood or just angry at him. So I learned early on to, like, if there's something that just doesn't seem like we're really gelling on something or really meshing on something or really agreeing, to really just ask again, like, what did you mean by when you said blah, blah, blah? And he would answer me. And most often we were on the same page and I just didn't realize it. We were saying the very same thing, just in different words. And then that totally took the conflict away when I would ask those clarifying questions. And so that's something else. Don't just assume you know what. That's part of communication. And in our 4th podcast, we talked about communication. And so it's really an important part of communication to really understand what your partner is telling you before you make any kind of, judgments or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of goes along with, God says, don't ever go to bed angry at your parents. Or not your parents. I'm sorry. Why was I thinking parents? Angry at your spouse.
Right.
It was probably an alphabetical thing, spouse, SP.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's really probably best not to go to bed angry with anyone. So,
true.
That makes sense. We're talking about spouse relationships. So that's what we're focusing on. But
Yeah. So you don't want to go to bed angry at anyone. And this is where, clarifying the questions, getting your clarifying questions. Say that 10 times fast.
That's a big word, yeah.
Get that in your head and ask questions so that you know exactly what your spouse is talking about. If there's any kind of a confused communication that's going in, and that is going to help, diffuse a lot of fights, because I know with Jess and I, we've had some times, we're normal. We've had some times where we've had some disagreements. We don't ever let it elevate to an all-out brawl or fight, because that is, that's letting the carnal flesh really get a hold of your relationship.
And it's harder to come back from, and it takes longer. And when you allow you and your spouse to have an all-out fight like that, you've already started tearing down your relationship, and it takes extra time to build back up. Yeah. So you really don't want to allow yourselves to do that, and not very often if you do it,
Yeah. So I would like to wrap this podcast up today, and we now have a new ebook that has come out, and we're so proud of it.
I'm very excited to share this information with you.
You can go to our blog. You can get it there on the side panel. There may be a pop-up on the lower left that you can get it from as well. Or you can just go to the website, straight out of the website, and you can go to ebook.therelationshiprevivalists.com. And
there's an S at the end of Revivalists.
Exactly. And you can download our ebook. It's called The 7 Simple Steps, not the 7 Simple Secrets to having a loving, lasting relationship. Yes. And these are things that I believe and Jess believes that can really get you from where you're at and start turning that ship around so that you can have an amazing relationship.
And remember, keep it little changes. Don't think you have to change everything all at once, because then you won't.
Exactly.
Most likely. So just little changes, and you're going to see great results.
Exactly. This is a gift to you from us.
Yes.
All we ask is that you put your email address in there so that we have a way to communicate with you, and you can get more updates and see what we're doing as well. So with that, we are going to close our podcast, and we will see you in the next podcast next Wednesday.
See you later.